The alien delegation arrived on Earth under the weight of great anticipation. The skies were filled with silent watchers as the vast vessel hovered above the capital. Its metallic surface glimmering in the morning light, thousands of humans gathered, below, some cheering, some trembling, unsure if this meeting meant salvation or destruction. The government announced peace, the people prayed it was true. The visitors descended slowly from their ship, tall, luminous figures with eyes that glowed like twin suns, their movements, graceful yet heavy with authority. They were wrapped in layered garments, woven with colors no human had ever seen, shimmering and shifting like liquid light as they walked. The human officials forced smiles upon their faces, their hands trembling ever so slightly, even as cameras recorded every moment for the world to see. The president stepped forward with a speech rehearsed 1,000 times, offering words of welcome that felt hollow in the crisp air. The aliens did not respond with words at first. They only stared, their eyes scanning the crowd, their expressions unreadable. The silence dragged longer than anyone expected, and whispers rippled through the gathered audience until finally the alien leader raised one slender hand and the noise ceased instantly. The leader spoke in a voice both melodic and commanding, saying that their council had come to judge whether humanity was ready to stand among the stars. The delegation was led through the city streets and into corridors lined with soldiers, their boots striking the ground in nervous rhythm. Banners fluttered overhead, painted with slogans of peace, unity, and progress. But beneath the polished surface, there was a tension that refused to fade. The aliens observed everything in silence, their glowing eyes darting from face to face as if reading hidden thoughts. The human guides attempted to impress them with monuments and parades. Children were lined along the streets waving flags, rehearsed smiles on their faces as their parents looked on with a mix of pride and fear. The aliens did not wave back, they simply watched and studied with an intensity that made even the bravest soldier falters. The convoy approached the great hall built hurriedly for the occasion, its marbles still smelling of fresh polish. The aliens paused, their leader tilted their head toward the massive structure and whispered words in a language that no human translator could grasp. The other aliens responded with solemn nods before stepping inside. The hall was crowded with officials, journalists, and representatives from every nation. Cameras blinked like restless eyes recording every twitch, every breath. The president rose again, his speech echoing against the high walls. He spoke of friendship, he spoke of cooperation. He spoke of a new chapter in history, but the aliens remained unmoved, their eyes narrowing, as if weighing the truth of every syllable. At the close of the speech, the alien leader approached the podium with measured steps. The audience held its breath, waiting for words that might decide the fate of their world. The leader looked across the sea of human faces, and for the first time, their expression shifted, not anger, not joy, but something sharper, a piercing curiosity that unsettled everyone in the room. The leader declared that words were not enough, that they had come to see humanity not in speeches but in truth, and that nothing could be hidden from them. The visitors walked through guarded corridors, their glowing eyes catching every detail, every shadow, every hesitation. From the humans who escorted them, the halls were lined with polished stone and gleaming metal. Banners of peace stretched across the walls, and guards stood like statues, their weapons held firmly, though their hands shook beneath the weight of the moment. The aliens seemed unimpressed by the grandeur. Their gaze pierced through the decorations, as though they were nothing but paper masks meant to cover deeper truths. The corridors grew quieter as the delegation moved further from the cheering crowds. Outside, silence fell heavy with each step echoing through the endless passageways. The humans leading the way spoke little, their rehearsed words fading into nervous mumbles. The aliens exchanged glances, communicating in ways unseen by human eyes, their luminous orbs shifting with subtle pulses of light as if silent messages passed between them. The leader of the alien envoys walked at the center, tall and imposing, their robe flowing behind like liquid fire. They studied every face. They passed every detail of the hall, as if memorizing the soul of the place. A young soldier, barely out of his teens, stood guard at a doorway, and though he tried to hold his gaze steady, the moment the alien eyes met his, he faltered, looking away, his jaw trembling. The alien leader slowed, briefly tilting their head, and then moved on, leaving the boy to wonder if his very thoughts had been read. The deeper they went, the darker the corridors became, the bright banners no longer present, the walls bare and marked with faint scratches as though many hands had brushed against them over time. The human officials grew stiffer, their voices quieter, until one of them, a tall man in a dark suit, attempted to regain control of the moment. He spoke of human strength, of progress, of unity. He spoke of the wonders of technology and industry, but the aliens did not respond. Their silence was louder than his words. Sudden sound broke the uneasy quiet, a faint metallic clang from a door at the far end of the hall. The aliens turned instantly, their glowing eyes narrowing. The humans froze, their faces pale. The man in the suit stammered something about maintenance, but the alien leader lifted a hand commanding silence. The delegation advanced slowly toward the sound, their robes whispering across the stone floor. The humans scrambled to keep up their attempts to block the path, failing under the sheer presence of the visitors. When the door was opened, the air changed inside, where surveillance terminals rose of glowing screens flickering with endless feeds. The aliens studied them, their eyes widening ever so slightly. The screens showed fenced yards, dimly lit rooms, children huddled together, their faces marked with fear and confusion. The aliens stepped closer, their light reflecting on the glass of the monitors. Whispers rippled through their ranks as images of caged youth played before them. The humans stuttered their words, tangled excuses about laws and security, but the aliens were no longer listening. Their expressions hardened. The air in the corridor grew colder as the leader turned slowly toward the officials, their voice cutting like a blade, asking if this was the truth of humanity. During a private tour, the aliens were ushered deeper into the restricted wings of the facility, their footsteps echoing against steel floors as the humans tried desperately to steer them away from what they feared would be discovered. The corridors grew narrower, the walls bare, and the atmosphere thick with unease. The alien leader slowed their pace, their glowing eyes flickering brighter, as though some instinct guided them toward the hidden truth. The escorts hesitated at a heavy door, reinforced with iron locks and electronic seals. One official insisted that the area was off-limits due to security risks, but the aliens ignored the protest. Their leader raised one hand, and with a gesture, the locks released as if compelled by some unseen force. The door slid open with a grinding sound, and what lay beyond silenced even the most guarded of human hearts. Rows upon rows of cages stretched across the dim chamber. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of confinement within the cages. Huddled groups of children, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with fear, their voices low and trembling as they whispered among themselves. Some clung to one another, their small hands shaking. Others stared blankly at the newcomers, too weak to react, too numb to cry. The aliens stepped forward, their radiant forms casting soft light over the chamber, illuminating the suffering hidden in shadow. Gasps rippled through the delegation, shock etched onto every alien face. One envoy dropped to their knees, their glowing eyes dimming in sorrow. Another covered their face with long fingers trembling with rage. The leader stood in silence, their gaze locked on the nearest cage, where a child, no older than 6, pressed tiny fingers through the bars, reaching out with a desperate innocence that shattered the composure of all who saw it. The humans stumbled over words, their excuses pouring out in a flood. They spoke of policy, of enforcement, of order. They claimed it was temporary. They claimed it was for protection, but the words rang hollow against the cries of the children. The alien leader turned sharply, their voice rising in a tone that resonated through the chamber, a sound both musical and furious. They demanded an answer, asking why a race that spoke of peace and progress would lock its own young behind bars like criminals. The chamber erupted, the aliens shouting in their strange tongue, their luminous eyes flaring with outrage. The humans tried to calm them, but every attempt failed. The sight was too much, too raw, too undeniable. The leader pointed toward the cages and declared that no civilized world, no enlightened species could justify such cruelty. The officials grew pale, sweat dripping from their brows as cameras hidden in the walls silently recorded every moment for history to remember. One alien elder stepped closer to the cages, kneeling before the frightened children, their voice soft and melodic. They promised that no harm would come, that truth had been seen, and it could not be erased. The children reached toward the elder, their eyes wide with fragile hope, and in that instant the delegation knew that their mission had shifted from judgment to intervention. The council chamber erupted in chaos as the alien leader rose in disbelief, demanding to know if this was true. Their voice echoed through the hall like thunder, shaking the walls and silencing the murmurs of the humans gathered there. The luminous eyes of the delegation blazed with fire, brighter than the chamber lights themselves, their figures towering and unyielding, their anger undeniable. The president stood frozen behind his podium, his carefully prepared speeches forgotten. His lips moved, but no words came out. The officials who had accompanied the aliens shuffled nervously, their faces pale, as they exchanged frantic glances. They tried to whisper explanations to one another, hoping to find a path out of the storm, but the aliens were not listening anymore. Their fury filled the air like a physical weight pressing down upon every soul in the room. The alien leader struck the table with a clawed hand, the sound reverberating like the crack of stone. The chamber fell utterly silent. The leader demanded again to know what reason, what twisted logic could justify the imprisonment of children. The words were sharp, each syllable cutting through the silence and driving fear deeper into the hearts of the humans. The officials attempted to speak of laws and order, of border security, of necessity, but the excuses shattered like glass against the unflinching wrath of the visitors. One alien envoy stepped forward, their robes swirling like a storm, their voice quivering with rage as they declared that even the most primitive tribes of distant worlds cared for their young, that no species, claiming wisdom or progress, could ever lower themselves to such acts. The audience of human delegates shifted in their seats, shame burning on their faces, though some still held stubborn silence, unwilling to admit guilt before outsiders. The alien elder, who had knelt by the cages, raised their voice, now carrying the sorrow of the children they had seen. They spoke of the cries still echoing in their mind, of the small hands pressed desperately against cold steel bars. The words struck harder than anger, piercing the hearts of those present. The journalists who had been recording every second felt their cameras tremble in their hands, as if they too carried the weight of judgment. The chamber grew restless. Whispers spread like wildfire as more humans began to murmur in disagreement with their leaders. Some nodded at the words of the aliens, unable to deny the truth anymore. The alien leader raised their hand once more, and the room grew still. They declared that such cruelty was not a matter of politics, but of morality, and that morality was the foundation of all civilizations worthy of joining the stars. The officials were cornered, their explanations weak, their authority crumbling in the presence of beings whose very presence demanded truth. They looked to the president, who finally forced himself to speak, his voice breaking as he attempted to claim misunderstanding. But the alien leaders stepped forward, their glowing eyes burning with fury and sorrow. They spoke one final question that silenced the hall completely. "Are you mad?" The humans stuttered, claiming it was security and order, but their voices trembled under the heavy alien gaze. The president lowered his eyes to the polished floor, his fingers gripping the edge of the podium until his knuckles turned white. His speechwriters shifted nervously, shuffling their notes. Though none of the words on those pages could save them now, the chamber felt smaller with every breath, as though the very walls pressed inward under the force of alien judgment. One official, a tall man in a sharp gray suit, stepped forward, attempting to gather authority. He raised his hand and spoke of policies meant to preserve national safety. He spoke of complicated matters of sovereignty and law. He painted the children as part of a system that demanded control, yet his words faltered as he felt the burning eyes of the alien delegation upon him. The envoy nearest to him tilted their heads slowly, their glowing gaze flickering as if they could see through every lie and every hollow justification. Another official interrupted, desperate to shift the narrative. He claimed that the cages were temporary, that the children were only held for short periods, that they were well treated and cared for. The alien elder, who had knelt with the children, rose, now their robe flowing with silent weight. They declared with steady sorrow that no kindness can be found in steel bars, no safety can be found in the trembling hands of the innocent, locked away from light. Their words cracked the voice of the official, who grew pale and stepped back into the crowd. The president cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. He attempted to redirect the conversation to diplomacy, to friendship, to the importance of the historic meeting. He pleaded that misunderstandings must not destroy the fragile bridge between species. The alien leader raised a hand, silencing him instantly. The glow of their eyes intensified, casting shadows across the marble floor. The leader spoke of truth, not words that echoed through galaxies. They declared that they had come to see the human soul, and that what they had seen was darker than the void itself. The chamber fell silent, the humans shifting in their seats, some frowning in defense, others staring at the ground in shame. One young diplomat whispered to another that the aliens did not understand cultural complexities, but the whisper carried in the silence, and the alien delegation turned toward them with eyes that froze, the words in their throat. No complexity, no excuse could hide the pain of caged children. The aliens began to murmur among themselves, their voices a chorus of sorrow and fury. The sound resonated through the chamber, like a storm building at sea. The humans could not understand the language, yet they felt its weight, like thunder rolling over their hearts. Finally, the alien leader spoke once more, their voice louder, sharper, Commanding attention, they declared that a species that imprisoned its own children was not ready to walk among the stars. The words rang out, final and merciless. The humans looked to one another, their faces etched with despair as they realized the consequences of what had been revealed. The fragile bridge of peace had cracked under the weight of truth. The chamber filled with uproar as alien diplomats shouted in anger, calling the act savage and unworthy of a thinking race. Their voices rose and clashed like a storm raging inside stone walls, a chorus of fury that shook the confidence of every human official in the room. The sound was not just noise, it carried a force that rattled the very lights above, as though the building itself trembled at their outrage. The humans attempted to respond, their words tumbling over one another, as they tried to explain that they had been misunderstood, that the situation was complicated, that the world was not perfect, but progress was being made. Their arguments melted into the furious chorus. The aliens struck the air with gestures sharp and commanding, their glowing robes flowing with power, every envoy speaking with conviction and authority that made the excuses sound pitiful in comparison. The alien leader rose from their seat, their towering figure casting shadows that stretched across the chamber. They demanded silence, and even the echoes of shouting ceased instantly. They spoke with fire in their voice, asking how a race that claimed to seek peace with the stars could justify chains and cages for their own young. The words reverberated like a verdict in a cosmic trial, each syllable cutting through the air with finality. Human General stood, his medals glinting under the chamber lights. He spoke firmly about discipline and protection. He claimed that without order the world would collapse, that children must sometimes be separated for their safety. The alien elders stepped forward, eyes blazing with sorrow and fury. They declared that no order built upon suffering could last, that no safety found in fear could ever be real. The general faltered, his shoulders heavy as though the weight of his own words crushed him where he stood. The uproar swelled again. Alien envoys raising their voices louder than before. One slammed a hand against the table, sending vibrations across the hall. Another pointed toward the humans, accusing them of corruption, cruelty, and blindness. The sound of their fury rose to such heights that the journalists in the back lowered their cameras, their hands trembling, unable to hold steady under the storm of condemnation. Some humans in the chamber broke under the pressure. One young diplomat covered his face with his hands, whispering that it was all wrong, that they had gone too far. Others whispered prayers, their voices nearly drowned by the uproar. A few hardened officials clenched their jaws and stared back defiantly, though even their defiance seemed small against the scale of alien fear. The alien leader raised their hand again, and silence returned, the air heavy and thick. They declared that what they had seen was not a misunderstanding, it was a truth undeniable, that a civilization revealing such cruelty could not claim ignorance. The words fell like iron chains wrapping around the hearts of the humans. The leader proclaimed that judgment was not distant, it was here, in this very chamber, and that the stars would not welcome a race that chose to harm its young. One alien elder stepped forward, declaring that no advanced species could justify the imprisonment of innocent young. Their voice carried across the chamber with a weight that silenced even the defiant officials. The elder was tall, their robe woven with threads of starlight, their glowing eyes filled not only with fury but also with deep sorrow. They raised their arms, and the chamber seemed to shrink under the gravity of their presence. They spoke of journeys across galaxies, of countless worlds visited, of civilizations both thriving and fallen. They told of how the measure of every race was not in its weapons, nor its machines, but in the way it cared for its most fragile members. The words fell heavy upon the humans like stones cast into water, ripples spreading through their hearts, breaking the thin walls of denial and pride. The elder described a world once proud that had chosen to harden its heart against its young. That world had fallen to ruin, consumed not by war nor famine, but by its own cruelty. Its people divided, its spirit lost its place among the stars, erased. The elder warned that the same fate awaited any species that turned its back on innocence, for innocence was the first light of every world, and once extinguished, it could not be rekindled. The chamber was silent, every ear straining to absorb the meaning, every human face marked with unease. Some bowed their heads in shame, others clenched their fists in resistance. Yet even the most stubborn felt the weight of the words pressing on their conscience. The journalists scribbled frantically, their pens shaking as they tried to capture a moment that would echo in history. The elder then pointed toward the door through which the aliens had entered the hidden chamber of cages. They spoke of the small faces pressed against cold steel, the trembling voices that whispered prayers into the darkness. They spoke of the little hands that reached for freedom. When no freedom came, the elder declared that those images would remain carved in their memory until the end of time, and that no excuse, no law, no policy could wash away the stain of such cruelty. The president attempted to rise his lips, parting as though to offer apology, but the elder raised a hand, silencing him without a word. The elder declared that apology without change was a shadow without light, empty and meaningless. The future of humanity, they said, would not be judged by speeches or promises, but by actions, by the way it chose to treat the smallest of its own. The elder lowered their voice, now soft yet sharper than any blade. They told the humans that the stars were watching, that the universe listened and remembered, that no world could hide from truth. They ended with a single warning that the fate of humanity rested not in treaties, not in technology, but in compassion. Without it, they said, no race could survive the judgment of the cosmos. Silence fell, the human delegation pale and shaken, realizing the truth of the accusation and the shame it carried. The chamber that once echoed with speeches and proud declarations now felt hollow, the air heavy with unspoken guilt. Some officials lowered their eyes, refusing to meet the burning stares of the aliens. Others sat rigid, their faces blank as if carved from stone, their pride refusing to crumble even as the truth pressed down upon them like an unmovable weight. The president sat, frozen, his hands clenched on the podium, his lips trembling as if words hovered there, yet none would come. His advisors whispered frantically, urging him to respond, but the sound of their voices was faint, drowned beneath the oppressive silence of judgment. One journalist dropped their pen, and the clatter echoed through the chamber, like a gunshot, drawing every eye for a brief moment before the stillness returned. Among the humans, division began to surface. One delegate from a small nation stood and spoke with a trembling voice, admitting that the aliens were right. He said that the children were innocent, that no excuse could justify cages, and fear. His words faltered, yet they carried through the hall, igniting murmurs of agreement. Others followed hesitantly, voices rising against the silence, as they admitted that what had been revealed could not be defended. But not all agreed. One general slammed his fist on the table, declaring that outsiders had no right to dictate human affairs. He shouted that humanity had endured wars and chaos long before the aliens arrived, that survival required harsh measures. His words were strong, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, for even he could not erase the image of the frightened children pressing their faces against cold bars. The memory was carved into him as deeply as it was carved into the aliens. The chamber turned into a storm of human voices, some pleading for understanding, some demanding sovereignty, some whispering apologies that broke into sobs. The alien delegation stood in silence, watching the conflict unfold, their glowing eyes reflecting not only anger but disappointment. The elder, who had spoken before, lowered their head as though the debate confirmed what they already feared, that humanity was divided not only against the aliens but against itself. Alien leader finally raised their hand, and the chamber fell quiet once more. The humans froze mid-sentence, their arguments cut short as the leader stepped forward, their robe trailing like liquid flame, their voice calm yet carrying the weight of mountains. They spoke of unity, of how a species must stand together for its future, or crumble in the void. They said that division was the shadow of cruelty, and that cruelty itself was a poison that devoured civilizations from within. The humans listened, their silence deeper than before, their shame mingling with fear, their pride clashing with the undeniable truth. Many realized then that the moment was not only about alien judgment, but about the very soul of humanity itself. In the end, the aliens issued a grave warning: change your ways, or lose the trust and friendship of the stars. The words hung in the chamber like a heavy shadow, stretching into every heart and every corner. The humans sat frozen, the enormity of the declaration crashing over them like a tidal wave. The president finally lifted his head, but his face was pale, his voice gone, his lips parting only to close again in silence. The alien leader stood tall, their glowing eyes brighter than ever. They declared that the universe was vast and filled with many races. Some had risen to greatness, others had fallen into ruin, but the dividing line between survival and extinction was always the same. How a species treated its young was the first measure of its worth. The leader raised a hand, and the chamber lights flickered as though the very building bent under the force of their presence. They told humanity that the stars would not welcome a race that imprisoned children, that no council of worlds would embrace a people who built cages instead of compassion. The officials whispered among themselves, Frantic voices laced with fear, they spoke of diplomacy, of time, of negotiations, but the aliens did not waver. Their judgment was not a negotiation, it was a truth carved into the very laws of the cosmos. One envoy leaned toward the president and whispered that humanity still had a chance, but only if it chose to change, only if it opened the cages and tore down the walls it had built around innocence. The words struck the president like a blow, his eyes lowering once more, as shame burned deeper within him. The journalists recorded everything, their cameras capturing the tension, the fear, the sorrow. They knew the images would spread across the world in hours, perhaps minutes. People everywhere would see the fury of the aliens, the shame of the officials, and the haunting truth that had been exposed. Whispers of rebellion would spread faster than fire, protests would rise louder than speeches, and the faces of the children would haunt the conscience of the world. The alien elder stepped forward one last time, their voice softer now but carrying more weight than any fury. They said that the choice belonged to humanity alone. No alien arm would unlock the cages, that no foreign hand would force compassion. The elder spoke of crossroads, of a path that led toward the stars and a path that led toward darkness. They told humanity that it must choose, and that the Papathio universe would be watching. The delegation turned their backs, robes shimmering like rivers of light as they walked toward the exit, the silence of their departure heavier than their words. The humans did not follow. They sat in their seats, frozen in reflection, knowing that the moment would shape not only their future but the fate of generations yet unborn. The children in cages were no longer hidden, no longer forgotten. Their cries had reached beyond the earth to the ears of the stars. The chamber remained still long after the aliens had gone, and for the first time in history humanity realized that its future would not be decided by power or by wealth, but by compassion, and by the courage to set its children free.